got to admit to you that when I came to La Harpe, I had no experience. I was around a bunch of people who really, really liked reunions. And I found that odd because coming from Chicago at a huge, huge high school, I always thought, why in the world would I go back to a reunion to see people I don't know, to remember that I didn't know them to start with? I didn't see any point to that. But I know that some of you enjoy going back to high school reunions because you get to see who's aged well, and maybe even more fun, who hasn't. And you always hope that was a cocky kid in school, they didn't age all that well, and you can finally say, justice, justice. We enjoy reunions, family reunions, where you get together and you see how many of those relatives you actually know who they are. Who is that person? Can you name your cousins? It's a fun game that I know a lot of you play at your relatives' reunions. We like seeing reunions of sports teams that did well. We like seeing reunions of even TV shows to get together. But the reunions that we really struggle with are when we're going to have to see people that we have been estranged from for a while. That's not so pleasant. Could be years. I was just reading yesterday about, many of us remember Dear Abby and Ask Ann Landers, and you know that they were sisters. And as they were growing up, they had this little friendly competition. And Abby went back to their hometown and said, you can carry my column in your paper for a lot less as long as you don't carry my sister's. And from that moment on, the two girls barely talked. And even after they had these successful writing careers as columnists, their families continued the feud. And we say, well, how does that go on? How are you at odds for such a long period of time? Lots of times it's over something minute, but you say, well, why didn't you just forgive that? Well, they didn't seem sorry, or they should have come to me, or I didn't want them to think it was nothing. And we go on and on with all of our excuses, and nothing gets resolved. What we're going to see today is a resolution to a family problem. Jacob and Esau haven't seen each other for 20 years, and they're twins. And as you remember, the last time they were together, Jacob felt he needed to leave home because he had kind of messed with his brother's inheritance. Not kind of, he ripped it off. And his brother was heard to say, when I get the chance, I'm going to kill him. Literally, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to end his life. So now 20 years have passed, and God told Jacob that he needed to go back home to the land of Canaan. We would know it today as Israel. The promised land that God had given to Abraham and Isaac and was now going to give to Jacob. And if you remember the story, Jacob sends a messenger to his brother. Figure I might as well just tell him I'm coming, and we don't want to go the route of surprise here. So he tells him that he's coming back home, and they come back, and the messenger says, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is your brother's coming to see you. The bad news is he's bringing 400 armed men with him. Jacob concludes that the battle is on. And so he panics a little bit. And he decides that he needs to get a bunch of animals together and send them as gifts to his brother. And by all appearances, it appears he's going to bribe him. Then he wrestles with his angel. And it's an odd story that we looked at last week, and through that, I think, all of a sudden, Jacob understands that his strength is actually in the Lord. So now that's where we pick up our text, and I see that there's been a real change here, and you can see this, because at the beginning, we see that he seems to be, well, verse 2, he put the servant wives and their children at the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Now, it sure looks like what he's going to do is he's going to send people ahead, the less important to the most important. But then the wrestling with God changed him. Then Jacob went on ahead. Instead of coming last, now Jacob goes first, and he confronts his brother. And what we read is that he confronts his brother by bowing to the ground 7 times before him. Now, that was a time of showing great sadness, repentance, contrition. And so there's this wonderful response from Esau, but I want you to see what Jacob does first. That Jacob humbles himself. And in any family squabble, somebody's got to make a move. Somebody has to be civil. Somebody needs to extend a hand or say hello, or maybe even something as simple as, I'm so sorry for what's happened to our relationship. And in essence, that's what Jacob does. He reaches out in an effort to gain some reconciliation here. And it's an amazing story, really. Now, Esau is concerned about these gifts. He says, what's the deal with the gifts? I don't need your gifts. I've got lots of stuff on my own. And maybe at first he's kind of offended, thinking that his brother's seeking to buy him off. But listen to these words from James Montgomery Boyce, because I think this is very instructive. He says, accepting a gift from one's enemy was improper in that culture. So if Esau accepted a gift from Jacob, it was an acknowledgement that the feud was over and that he would stand by and support rather than attack his brother. Since Jacob insists that Esau take the gift, we are probably right in suspecting that he was not yet fully confident that God would protect him. He was still trusting in his own plan and devices. Now, I don't know that I agree with that last part. I'm not so sure that's what was happening, but I do think what Jacob was doing was he was looking for a tangible sign that his brother was willing to accept him back. And he does. When you go forward in the text, this verse 4 is amazing because listen to the verbs that are here. There's 5 verbs here. Then Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, kissed him, and they both wept. What a tender, beautiful picture this is. These guys were apart for 20 years. And in this one moment, they're brought back together. And there's this part of us that wants to say, what happened to Esau? What happened? Was it that over the course of the years, maybe time had mellowed him, maybe he'd become more mature, maybe it was that when he was prospered, he felt a little bit more content and he could let things go? I'm not sure that it's of any real value to us to debate this, to wonder what's happening here. Maybe what we should do is just stand back and marvel at the work of God in forgiveness. When God can bring warring parties together is an amazing thing. Let me read you something from Philip Yancey. Yancey writes, "One factor that motivates me to forgive is that as a Christian I am commanded to, as a child of a father who forgives. And I can identify 3 pragmatic or practical reasons. First, forgiveness alone can halt the cycle of blame and pain, breaking the chain of ungrace. Without it, we remain bound to the people we cannot forgive, held in their vice grip. Second, forgiveness loosens the stranglehold of guilt in the perpetrator. It allows the possibility of transformation in the guilty party, even if a just punishment is still required for the wrong. And third, forgiveness creates a remarkable linkage, placing the forgiver on the same side as the party who did the wrong. Through it, we realize we are not as different from the wrongdoer as we would like to think. Forgiveness, undeserved, unearned, can cut the cords and let the oppressive burden of guilt roll away." That's a powerful quote. And did you catch that first thing he said? Without forgiveness, we remain bound to the people we cannot forgive. In other words, even though that other person may not give another thought to what's happened, you and I continue to churn, we continue to feel resentment, we continue to feel bitterness, and to a certain degree, we are still allowing that one circumstance to control our life. And as a result, we are giving up joy in order to maintain a grudge. Now, I realize that some of those grudges are deeply bound. And there's this part of us that says, I don't want to forgive because I don't want to let that person off. But here's the thing. Forgiveness is not letting somebody off. It's taking the hurt and giving it to the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm just going to bump this up to a higher court. And I'm going to let you, the righteous judge, take care of this. I'm going to let you make right the things that were wrong. I'm going to let you met out any punishment that's necessary. I'm going to give it to you so that I can go free. That's what forgiveness is. It's really a wonderful thing. The Bible tells us that we are to forgive because we are forgiven. And the thing is that we believe that we are now, we're told that we are now completely forgiven because we have trusted Christ. God has completely washed our sin away. And it's a marvelous thing what happens here. And when we forgive, we reflect the attitude of God's heart more clearly than at any other time. Because it is an unnatural thing to do. We live in a world that is all about payback and standing up and not letting yourself be walked over. And Christ tells us to forgive because I've forgiven you. Oh. And in order to do that, we've got to change our attitude. You see, I really think that when we come to forgiveness, we say, well, I know I need to forgive because everything that I've done to God is far worse than anything anybody's done to me. That's what we say. The thing is, we don't believe it. We actually, deep down inside of us, believe, well, you know, Lord, it's true that I sinned against you and you've forgiven me. But you know what they did to me? Think about that for a second. You know what that indicates? It indicates that we have no concept of the horror of sin at all. We're whitewashing our own sin. We don't see how offensive our lives are to God when we sin. Because if we did, then what other people do to us would seem as nothing compared to what He has forgiven us. And so there's a sense in which we have to change our attitude. We need to see our own sin so that we can see other people's sin in perspective, that we can give them the same kind of grace that we have received. Now, what happens next in this text is somewhat controversial. Well, maybe not to all the commentators, but I don't like it. So these guys reunite, and Esau says, hey, let's get going. I'll lead the way. Jacob replies, you can see, my lord, that some of the children are very young, and the flocks and herds have their young too. If they're driven too hard, even for one day, all the animals could die. Please, my lord, go ahead of your servant. We will follow slowly at a pace that is comfortable for the livestock and the children. I will meet you at Seir. All right, Esau said, but at least let me assign some of my men to guide and protect you. Jacob responded, that's not necessary. It's enough that you've received me warmly, my lord. So Esau turned around and started back to Seir that same day. Jacob, on the other hand, traveled on to Succoth, which is in like the opposite direction. There he built for himself a house and made shelters for his livestock, and that is why the place was named Succoth, which means shelters. And then later on, he moves on to Shechem. Now, we read this passage and we think, wait a minute, look at what he's doing. He's finally reconciled with his brother. His brother says, come on, let's get together, let's talk, we got a lot of time to catch up on. And Jacob says, oh, no, we'll be right there. And then he goes and ditches him and goes in the other direction. That's the way commentators look at this. I don't think that's what we should be doing. You see, I think there's a faulty assumption here. We think that Jacob hasn't changed. I think he has. And so we say, well, how do you explain this? What we hear when we hear this text is we hear Jacob basically say, if it was today, Jacob would be saying, oh, it's so good to see you. Esau says, hey, I'm going to go down to the Hampton. Why don't we all go together? And Jacob says, oh, no, we don't move as fast as you do. He says, we'll meet you there. Right? That's what we're picturing in our head. So they go down the highway to the Hampton Inn. Esau stops there, and they wait for days. Where's Jacob? He got on the highway going the other direction. Instead of going south, he went, oh boy, he went west. And so we go, what What kind of a deal is this? This guy hasn't changed at all. There's more to the story. I want to show you a map because we don't know where this Seir place is. See this red line on the right? That long red line? Seir was where Esau lived. Way down. It's not even on the screen. It's so far down there. In the land of Edom. And so he came all the way up to meet his brother. And then he turned around and he started to head back. Jacob takes a right turn, and you see the line over there on the left. That's eventually where he ends up. So here's what's happening. I think this is a matter of, let's say you saw one of your friends at a class reunion. And you say, oh, it's been so good to see you. Oh, man, we need to do this more often. And you say to them, because they now live in Chicago, you say, next time, let's get together in Chicago. I said, that'd be great. Let's get together in Chicago. We'll get there. We'll get there soon. Now, does your friend really think that you're going to be there next week? Probably your friend is hoping it's not going to be next week. They want some advance notice. Is it possible that all Jacob and Esau were saying was, Jacob said, we'll come to your house. We'll come to your house. You head back. It's going to take us a while to get there, but we'll get there. So maybe what we are doing is reading into the text what we think Jacob did. So it doesn't tell us. It doesn't say that he's being dishonest. We are reading into the text. And in this day, when you and I have a tendency to get lots of text messages and social media messages and print kind of messages through email where we can read all kinds of things into that, we need to be very, very careful that we don't read negative things into things that may not be negative. And is it possible that we're reading negative things into Jacob's motives because that's what we would do? That we'd be really uncomfortable in this situation and we just want to get out of there. I don't want to hang around with you. I just don't want you to kill me. I want to make some arguments here. I want you to see something. First of all, Jacob didn't go with his brother for a reason. First, because God told him to go back to Canaan. Canaan was that part on the left side of the screen. Seir was on the right side of the screen. So it may not have been that I'm not going to go with you. I'll get there, but I've got something that I need to do that God has told me to do first. In which case, what he's doing is not negative. It's actually a positive thing. He goes back home to the promised land. Second, there's this question. Why would you choose, after you've just been reunited, to do something that would make your brother think, this guy hasn't changed at all. I'm going to go back and kill him. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then third, in just a couple of chapters, what we see is that Jacob and Esau are together burying their dad. Doesn't seem to be any animosity there. Is it possible that what's happening here is that Jacob went to Canaan, he did his thing, he established a home, and then maybe for the holidays, maybe they went for Christmas or something. Just check and see if anybody's paying attention here. They didn't have Christmas then. Okay, you got that? So maybe they got together for the holidays. We're going to Seir. Can everybody pack up? We're going to Seir. We're going to spend time with my brother. And maybe they vacationed together in the Bahamas or something. I don't know where they went, but maybe they did things like that. All we're told is that at that moment, Jacob had to go back to the promised land, and eventually they did get together for Dad's funeral. We don't know what happened in the intervening years. And apparently there were a number of years because I think, if I remember correctly, that when they went to the funeral, they were 120 years old at that point. So, let's head off to the Bahamas. Nobody wants to see 120 years old on the beach. You just don't want to see that. So here's what's going on. So now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is he spending so much time on this? Who cares? because I don't want to do anything in this text that is going to take us away from the wonder of that reconciliation, that forgiveness. See, it'd be easy for us to say, oh, well, yeah, sure, he forgave them, but they never really changed. Do not dodge the command to forgive. And let's be very careful about attributing motives to each other, because that's what causes a lot of the conflict to start with. That instead of taking what somebody said and asking them to clarify what they meant, we attribute bad things to them, and that causes a conflict. I am stunned as I'm reading about all these martyrs as we're working in our Sunday school class. These guys would be treated shamefully, horribly treated by family, by the guards, and their resolve is that we are going to show kindness and forgiveness and love to these people, because that's how we show Christ. And I think, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? Why do we hold these grudges? So how do we get past this? Well, number one, we need to forgive in our own heart. That means you and I need to sit down and talk to God and say, Lord, honestly, I know I'm supposed to forgive. I just can't let it go. I want to give it to you. Please help me to do that. I know you are the just and righteous judge. I know you're going to make all things right. I know that I've been forgiven far more than what this person has done to me. Help me to believe that so much that I am able to let this go. Not completely maybe, but to at least let it go into your hands so that I might move on with my life. That's a difficult thing to do. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not even saying it's what I do. It's what the Bible tells us to do, to forgive. Second, we need to make right what we did wrong. He said, I didn't do anything wrong. I know, we never do anything wrong. But what about all the bitterness and the resentment and the angry words and the nasty things you've said over the years because of this? We need to ask forgiveness for those things because those things are wrong. And sometimes we even have to go to the person that we've been slandering and say, I need to ask your forgiveness. And you might be surprised at what that does in the relationship. But really, it's not about the other person at this point. It's about our relationship with God. That you and I have to get right with Him. And the only way we can do that is to confess our culpability and be right with Him. And then finally, we need to make some effort at reconciliation. And, the fact is, you guys may never become friends. It's very possible. I don't know if Jacob and Esau ever became friends. They were really different. We read about that. Esau was an outdoors guy. Jacob was kind of an indoors guy. They had really different interests. They may have had different value systems. They had all these family members that were coming from different areas. Maybe they were never real close, like friends. But they were able to get back together as brothers. And that counts for something. So you may never have the same kind of relationship you had with this person that you had before. But somewhere along the line, somebody's got to make an effort. And like I said, it may be a handshake. It could be a hug that you don't have to say anything. It could just be a simple, so how you doing? It doesn't take big things. It takes one step, and the hope is that the other person will take a step, and then you might be in store for seeing something majestic happen. You might get a chance to see God restore a family, or restore a friendship, or just really heal you in this process. Forgiveness is an amazing thing, and it's something that we all struggle with. stories of forgiveness are always things that you sit back and you look at and you go, wow, that's tremendous. And the reason is because it's not the way normal people function. But God says, you're not a normal person anymore. You're a child of the King, and you should act like it. I really believe that the most joy-filled people in the world are those who have learned to forgive, to truly forgive. And I have a suspicion that they may be the first person in line to hear God say, well done. So let's pray. Father, my suspicion is that we all have somebody that you're prompting us to forgive. And we are resisting. We have a truckload of excuses. Father, instead of making excuses, help us to just listen to what you're saying. And then help us to begin that very strange, foreign path that leads us to forgiveness. Lord, maybe what we need to pray is that you would work in us so that we would want to forgive. But wherever you need to start, Lord, please help us to appreciate the grace that we've received and then be willing to extend it to even those we feel deserve it least. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.